Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy the content. Please subscribe.
Please, parents, don't raise your children in that same way. A woman named Mama Chidima deeply pampers her only daughter, Adaeze. In the heart of a busy and loud city in Nigeria, there stood a house that was more like a palace than a home. The gates were tall and made of shiny metal, and the garden inside was filled with flowers that smelled like heaven every single morning. This was where Mama Chidinma lived with her only daughter, a girl named Adaeze. Mama Chidinma was a very rich woman who owned many shops in the biggest market in the city, and because she worked so hard, she made sure that Adaeze never had to lift a finger for anything. From the time the sun started to peek over the horizon to the moment the stars shone bright at night, Adaeze lived a life that felt like she was a queen in a storybook. She never knew the feeling of hard work or the sweat that comes from cleaning a room or standing over a hot stove to prepare a meal. Every single morning, before Adaeze even opened her eyes, Mama Chidinma was already moving around the room quietly. She would pick out the finest clothes for her daughter to wear, making sure the fabric was soft and the colors were bright and beautiful. When Adaeze finally decided to wake up, she would stretch her arms out wide, yawn a big yawn, and walk to the bathroom where her water was already drawn and waiting for her. She did not even have to look for her own soap or towel because Mama Chidinma had everything perfectly placed right where it needed to be. While Adaeze sat at the vanity table brushing her hair and looking at her own reflection, her mother was downstairs in the kitchen making the most delicious breakfast. The smell of frying plantains, fresh akara, and steaming hot pap would drift through the house, calling Adaeze to come down and eat. Adaeze loved her mother very much, but she loved the way she was taken care of even more. She spent her days walking through the garden, reading her favorite books, or talking to her friends on the phone while she lounged on the velvet chairs in the living room. Sometimes, when a piece of dust would land on the floor, the house helps would rush to clean it up before Adaeze even noticed. She never had to wash a single plate, she never had to sweep the floors, and she certainly never had to touch a dirty cloth to scrub the grime away. Her hands were always soft, her nails were always perfectly polished, and her life was as smooth as a calm river. Mama Chidinma watched her daughter with a heart full of pride and joy, thinking that by doing everything for her, she was showing how much she loved her. She believed that as long as she was there, Adaeze would never have to worry about a single thing in this world. One afternoon, while they were sitting on the porch, drinking chilled fruit juice, Mama Chidinma looked at Adaeze and smiled. She saw a beautiful young woman who was kind and sweet, but she did not see that she was also a woman who knew nothing about the real world. Adaeze would look at the house helps and feel happy that the floors were clean, but she never asked how they did it. She would eat the food on her plate and enjoy every bite, but she never once asked her mother how to mix the spices or how long the meat should stay in the pot. It was a cycle of comfort that went on for years, a gentle routine where Adaeze was the center of everything and the world moved around her just to keep her happy and rested. She felt like a flower in a golden pot, protected from the wind and the rain, never knowing that the roots needed to be strong enough to survive on their own. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, Adaeze continued to grow into a woman, but her mind was still like that of a little child who expected the world to give her everything for free. She saw her mother's tired hands, which were now getting a little wrinkled from years of working, but she only thought of how her mother could do even more for her. She did not know how to handle the heavy iron to press her own dresses, and she did not know how to sort out the laundry so that the colors would not mix and get ruined. To Adaeze, these were just things that happened by magic. She thought that life would always be this way, that the food would always appear, that the clothes would always be clean, and that she would always be the princess in the palace. She had no idea that far away from their mansion, in a different part of the city, things were moving in a way that would soon change her quiet, pampered life forever. The winds of change began to blow into the mansion one sunny afternoon, when a grand car pulled up to the gate. It was Emeka, a young man who was known across the city for his success in the shipping business. Emeka was tall, handsome, and he had a smile that could light up the darkest of rooms. He had been looking for a wife for a long time, someone who would be the queen of his own big, beautiful home. And when he saw Adaeze at a friend's wedding, he knew his search was over. He started coming to see Mama Chidinma, bringing gifts of expensive fabrics, bags, or imported rice, and gold jewelry to show that he was a man who could provide. Mama Chidinma was delighted because she saw in Emeka a man who was just as wealthy as she was, and she thought that if Adaeze married him, she would continue to live in the same luxury she had always known. She told herself that her daughter would be well taken care of forever, just as she had been doing for all these years. Emeka spoke to Mama Chidinma about his intentions, and his voice was full of respect and love. He told her that he wanted to build a life with Adaeze, and that he would make sure she never lacked anything. Mama Chidinma listened to him, nodding her head with a wide smile, because she could not imagine a better future for her daughter. When she told Adaeze about the proposal, the young girl was very happy. She was not thinking about the responsibilities of being a wife or the hard work of building a home. She was only thinking about the big, beautiful wedding, the fancy dresses she would wear, and the status of being Mrs. Emeka. She imagined her new home to be just like the one she was leaving, a place where everything was done for her and where she would spend her days looking beautiful and living in total comfort. During the weeks that followed, the house became a place of noise and excitement. There were tailors coming in and out to measure Adaeze for her wedding gowns, and there were event planners meeting with Mama Chidinma to discuss the food, the decorations, and the music. Adaeze spent all her time looking at magazines and talking to her friends about the different styles of jewelry she would wear. She was so busy being the center of attention that she did not notice the way the women in her family were whispering to each other. Some of the older aunties would come to visit, and they would watch Adaeze lounging on the sofa while her mother organized everything. They would shake their heads and murmur, "Who will teach this girl to be a wife? A home is not just about the beauty of the woman. It is about the work she puts into the house to make it a home." Mama Chidinma would always brush these concerns aside, waving her hand as if they were talking about something unimportant. She told the aunties that her daughter was a princess and that she did not need to know how to scrub floors or spend hours in the kitchen. She said that in this modern world, A rich woman could always hire someone else to do the work. Adaeze listened to this and agreed completely. She felt that her only job was to be beautiful and kind, and she truly believed that she was prepared for marriage because she had the right shoes, the right dresses, and the right man. She never once asked her mother to show her how to cook a pot of soup, and she never asked how to organize the laundry or manage the house staff. She thought that these things were beneath her, and she continued to let her mother do everything, right up until the very last day before the wedding. Even as the days grew closer and the pressure of the wedding preparations became very high, Adaeze remained in her own little world. She saw her mother getting tired and she saw the house helps running around to finish all the tasks, but she did not feel the need to help. She was busy practicing her work for the aisle and dreaming about the cake. It was as if there was a wall around her, keeping her away from the reality of what a woman's role truly meant in a home. Mama Chidinma, in her deep love for her daughter, was blinded by her desire to see Adaeze happy. She did not want to burden her daughter with work, so she kept pushing her away from the chores. She did not realize that, by taking away every responsibility, she was actually making her daughter weak and unprepared for the life that was waiting for her on the other side of the wedding door. As the eve of the wedding arrived, the house was filled with flowers and the air was heavy with the scent of perfume and happiness. Everyone was laughing and dancing, celebrating the union of two wealthy families. Adaeze looked at her reflection in the full-length mirror and smiled, happy with how she looked. She felt ready to step into her new life, feeling like she had mastered the art of being a bride. She did not know that being a bride was only for one day, but being a wife was for a lifetime. She went to sleep that night in her soft silk sheets, dreaming of a life that would be as easy as a breeze, not knowing that the very next day she would step out of her mother's protective hands and into a world where she would have to face the truth all by herself. How do you think Adaeze will react when she first realizes that her new home does not have the same team of helpers that her mother's house had? The morning of the wedding dawned with a sky so blue and clear that it seemed the sun itself was smiling down upon the union of Adaeze and Emeka. From the earliest hours, the mansion was a whirlwind of activity, buzzing with the sound of laughter, the rhythmic beat of talking drums, and the frantic movements of stylists who had come to transform Adaeze into the most beautiful bride the city had ever seen. Mama Chidima moved through the halls like a general, her eyes bright with tears of pride, her hands shaking slightly as she checked one last time that everything was perfect. She had poured her heart, her wealth, and every bit of her energy into this day, wanting to ensure that her daughter would walk into her new life with the grace of a princess and the blessings of all who knew her. Adaeze sat in the center of the chaos, her hands folded gently in her lap, watching as people scurried to put on her shoes, adjust her veil, and place the final touches of jewelry around her neck, all while she remained as still and serene as a statue. When the time finally came to leave for the ceremony, the entire compound was packed with guests dressed in the most exquisite traditional attire, creating a sea of bright colors and shimmering fabric that danced under the morning light. The wedding itself was a sight to behold, a grand spectacle that combined the traditions of their ancestors with the modern luxury that both families were famous for. As Adaeze walked down the aisle, her mother felt a deep ache in her chest, a mixture of profound happiness and a strange lingering shadow of worry that she could not quite name. She watched her daughter exchange vows with Emeka, a man who looked at Adaeze with pure adoration, and she whispered a quiet prayer that her daughter would always be treated with such gentleness. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, The cheers from the crowd were so loud that they seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, and for a moment, the world felt absolutely perfect. The reception was a celebration that went on for hours, filled with mountains of delicious jollof rice, pounded yam with rich egusi soup, and endless trays of chilled drinks that kept everyone dancing until the stars came out to watch over the festivities. Adaeze felt like the queen of the earth, surrounded by her friends and family who showered her with praise and gifts, making her feel as though this joy would last forever. She did not once think about the fact that the party would eventually end, or that the guests would go home to their own lives, leaving her to step into a reality that required much more than just a beautiful smile and a gorgeous gown. She was caught up in the music, the laughter, and the feeling of being the most important person in the room, blissfully unaware of the quiet, serious nature of the life that awaited her behind the doors of her new home. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, signaling the end of the long day, Mama Chidinma pulled Adaeze into a final, tight embrace. She kissed her daughter's forehead and felt the soft skin that had never known the harshness of manual labor, her heart swelling with the desire to keep protecting her even now. She gave her a few final words of advice, mostly about how to carry herself with dignity and how to remain a woman of grace. But in her rush to ensure Adaeze's happiness, she forgot to tell her the most important lesson of all, that a home is built by the hands of the woman who lives in it. She watched as Emeka led his bride to the waiting car, the engine purring softly as they prepared to drive away to their new life. Adaeze looked back once, waving to her mother with a bright, carefree smile, feeling completely ready for what she thought would be a continuation of her pampered existence. The drive to their new house was short, and as the gates opened to reveal the beautiful mansion that Emeka had built for them, Adaeze gasped in delight at its beauty. It was even more magnificent than her mother's house, with tall pillars and polished marble floors that shone like mirrors under the bright moonlight. She stepped out of the car, feeling like the mistress of a grand castle, and as Emeka carried her over the threshold, she let out a light musical laugh. She felt that everything was exactly as it should be, a continuation of the paradise she had always known. She did not know that the staff she was used to seeing in her mother's home would not be present in the same way here, and that the quiet silence of the house was not a sign of peace, but a sign that the work of managing a household was now waiting for her to begin. As the door closed behind them, shutting out the noise of the wedding and the comfort of her mother's presence, as the door closed behind them, shutting out the noise of the wedding and the comfort of her mother's, the real journey for Adaeze was just about to begin in a way she could never have imagined. Since Adaeze has always been treated like a princess, do you think she will try to learn the ropes of running a household on her own? Or will she immediately feel overwhelmed when she realizes the difference in how things work in her new home? The morning sun crept through the large, velvet curtains of the master bedroom, casting long, golden fingers across the expensive rugs that covered the floor. Adaeze stirred in her sleep, stretching her arms, and waiting for the familiar sound of her mother's footsteps, or the soft voice of a helper coming to open the windows and bring her a tray of warm tea. But the silence in the house was heavy and absolute, broken only by the distant song of a bird outside in the garden. She waited for 10 minutes, then 20, her confusion growing as she stared at the high ceiling. Eventually, she realized that no one was coming. With a heavy sigh, she sat up, feeling a strange sense of loneliness creeping into her heart. She looked over to the other side of the bed. but it was already empty. Emeka had left early for his office, leaving a small note on the bedside table that simply said, "Good morning, my love. I will see you this evening." Hunger began to grow in her belly, a sharp, unfamiliar feeling that made her realize she had not eaten anything since the wedding feast the night before. Eye tiles. When she pushed the kitchen door open, she expected to see the familiar sight of a busy space filled with the smell of breakfast, but instead, she found a cold, empty room. The counters were clean, but there was no food anywhere. There was no pot of water on the stove, no bread on the table, and no fruit prepared for her. She opened the refrigerator and found only a few raw ingredients, some fresh vegetables, a few pieces of chicken, and a carton of milk, but they were all sitting there, waiting for someone to do something with them. She stared at the items, her mind going blank because she did not even know where the pots were stored or how to turn on the modern gas stove that stood before her. For the first time in her life, Adaeze felt a cold shiver of fear run down her spine. She picked up a knife to try and cut an onion, but she held it so awkwardly that she nearly dropped it, and she had no idea how to chop it properly without making a mess. She looked at the raw chicken and felt a wave of disgust and panic. She had always eaten chicken when it was perfectly cooked, seasoned, and served on a silver platter, but she had never touched a raw piece of meat in her life. She tried to turn the knob on the stove, but it was stiff, and when it finally sparked to life, the sudden flare of the fire made her jump back in terror. She turned it off immediately, her heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, her beautiful silk nightgown dragging on the floor, and felt like a small, helpless child lost in a forest. She spent the next hour walking around the house, trying to find someone to help her, but the house was completely empty. She looked in the laundry room and saw a pile of clothes that needed to be washed, but she did not even know how to start the large, complicated washing machine. She looked at the living room and saw a little bit of dust on the wooden table, and she realized that if she did not clean it, it would just stay there, getting thicker and thicker every day. The reality of her situation hit her like a heavy wave of water. Her mother was not there, the house helps were not there, and she was the one who was supposed to be the mistress of this house. The title of wife suddenly felt very heavy, like a crown that was too big and too sharp for her head. She went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands as the first real tears of her life began to fall. As the afternoon approached, the hunger in her stomach turned into a dull ache, and the silence of the house began to sound like a taunt. She thought about calling her mother, but she was too embarrassed to admit that she could not even boil an egg. She felt a deep sense of shame because she realized that while she had spent her life being pampered, she had never once asked to learn anything. She was a woman grown, married to a man who expected a partner, yet she felt like a helpless girl who did not know the first thing about surviving in her own home. When she heard the sound of the gate opening and the car pulling into the driveway, she jumped up, wiping her tears away quickly and trying to look composed up the stairs, and her heart began to race with a mixture of fear and dread. She knew that in a few short moments she would have to face him, and she had absolutely no idea what she was going to say when he asked her about her day. How do you think Emeka will respond when he finds his wife hungry, tired, and completely unable to manage the house after being away all day? The heavy oak door creaked open, and Emeka stepped inside, his tie loosened and his face wearing a tired but expectant smile. He had spent his first day as a husband working hard, thinking fondly of his wife, and imagining that he would come home to a house filled with the warm, inviting. He had spent his first day as a husband working hard, thinking fondly of his wife, and imagining that he would come home to a house filled with the warm, inviting scent of a home cooked meal. He walked into the living room, but the air was stale and quiet. He frowned, looking around, and noticed that the house looked exactly as it had when he left it that morning. He walked toward the kitchen, his footsteps sounding sharp and echoey in the empty space. And there he found Adaeze sitting on a stool, staring at the closed refrigerator door with a look of pure misery on her face. Her eyes were red, and her hair, which usually looked like a work of art, was now messy and tangled. Emeka's smile faded instantly, replaced by a look of deep concern. He walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder, asking her what was wrong. But for a long time, Adaeze could not speak. She felt a burning lump of shame in her throat, and she eventually burst into fresh, loud tears. Through her sobbing, she confessed everything. She told him how she had tried to enter the kitchen but could not light the stove, how she had looked at the clothes and did not know which soap to use, and how she had spent the entire day feeling like she was failing him. She told him about her mother's mansion and how she had lived her whole life without ever learning how to take care of a single thing. When she finished, she looked up at him, fully expecting him to be angry or disappointed, thinking he might regret marrying a woman who knew nothing of the world. Instead of shouting, Emeka sighed softly and sat down on the stool next to her. He held her hands in his, looking at her soft palms, and he spoke to her in a calm, patient voice. He told her that he had not married her for her ability to cook or clean, but because he loved her heart and her company. However, he also explained that a home is a living thing, and if it is not tended to by the people who live inside it, it will eventually wither and die. He told her that her mother had truly loved her, but by doing everything for her, she had accidentally kept her from growing up. He promised to help her, not by doing the work for her, but by teaching her, step by step, how to run their household together. He told her that it was not a sign of weakness to learn, but a sign of strength to grow. The following weeks were a time of great change for Adaeze. Every evening, Emeka would spend time with her in the kitchen, showing her how to peel yams, how to balance the heat on the stove, and how to mix the ingredients for a perfect pot of soup. At first, she was clumsy and made many mistakes. She burned the rice twice, and she once dropped a whole bottle of oil on the floor, but Emeka never laughed at her. Instead, he would encourage her, telling her that every mistake was just a lesson in disguise. Slowly, the fear in her heart began to fade, replaced by a sense of pride as she started to see her own hands doing the work. She learned how to manage the laundry, how to organize the cupboards, and how to make the house feel warm and welcoming. She finally felt like she was contributing to her own life, rather than just being a spectator in it. One evening, after several months had passed, Adaeze was in the kitchen alone, moving with confidence as she prepared a special meal for her and Emeka. The house was filled with the rich, spicy aroma of home-cooked food, and she felt a deep, warm sense of satisfaction that she had never known before. She realized then that her mother's love had been a beautiful gift, but the ability to care for herself and her home was the greatest gift she could have ever given herself. She looked out the window as the sun set, feeling like a true woman, strong and capable. She had learned that being a wife was not about being a servant, but about being the heart of a home. She stepped out of the kitchen just as the front door opened, and this time she walked to meet her husband with a smile that was not just beautiful, but also wise, grounded, and genuinely happy.